Hello, and thank you for joining us on Searching for Answers. We're still in the book of Luke, and if you go to chapter 9, we'll begin with the first verse and continue on. Please join us and read with us, read along with us, and hopefully we'll make things clear and you'll understand what we're all trying to say about Jesus. On my right is
John Brunt from the Azure Hills Church.
On my left
is Ivan Blazin from the School of Religion, Loma Linda University.
And my name is Carolyn Thompson. And John Brunt, would you continue reading a little bit, please?
All right. We are ready, I think, for chapter 9, verse 10.
Exactly.
Beginning the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Luke 9, verse 10. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Unless we go buy food for all this crowd," about 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everybody sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to set before the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over.
Now, just a minute here.
There's the number 12. You've got
Yeah,
right.
there's
12
12.
disciples. And,
That's right.
and this 12 here, and the 12 years old for Jairus' daughter. And what was the other 12?
12 years that the woman who had the hemorrhage
had the
Yes.
hemorrhage.
suffering.
The number 12 is really
Just
prominent.
comes up over and over
That's
again.
right. Now, how did he do this? Everybody was and why did he have them sit down in groups of 50? What significance does that have?
I don't know, maybe making a certain kind of order. You have to have an order. I mean, you know, we do in our potlucks, you know, okay, now we'll go from table 1 to table 2, and, you know, we have an order. Maybe Jesus is thinking about how to accomplish this task. And so he, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
I just wonder why Luke put that in there.
Yeah.
Must be for a reason.
Yes.
And then?
Well, you know, I think we should say a word about this introduction to the story.
All right.
See, because the disciples have come back. They have been commissioned to take care of demons.
Drive out demons.
Drive out
cure
demons.
diseases.
Cure diseases and so on. So they go out, and then they come back, and in chapter 10, that same parallel will be found, that same way, which is, of course, what you might expect. But on their return, they told Jesus everything that had happened, all that they had done, and they had been on a journey, and they maybe are tired and so on. So what it says is, he took them with him, and he withdrew privately to a city called Bethsaida.
Yeah.
I think he wants a private thing.
He wants to hear all the things the disciples accomplished.
And a chance for rest, too.
But what happened?
Well,
The crowds wouldn't
People
leave him
figured out where he
alone.
was.
and here's one of the most beautiful things, I
Yeah.
think, in the Gospels, because if you buy the idea that he withdraws privately so that they may rest and discuss, debrief, so to speak,
Debrief.
and he wants that private time, yet when the crowds found out about it, they followed him, and what's Jesus' reaction? And he welcomed
And healed them.
Yes, and he spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed. There it is again.
There it is.
Heal those who need to be healed. I think it's such a touch. The physician needs to rest.
Now, he could have said, just a minute, everybody. Can I have a little private time with
Yeah.
my followers here,
Yeah.
my 12 disciples?
That's right.
And then I'll come and take care of you folks.
No.
He didn't. He did it immediately, didn't he?
Well, even like he healed on the Sabbath, when sometimes he could have waited, as some of them thought he should, and yet the kingdom's healings do not wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he sees these people who are ill here, he has to move against it right away, against the illness.
That's right. But we get to the bread and the fishes.
Yeah.
How did he do that with everybody looking on?
Well,
Have you thought about that?
I don't know.
How could he's breaking it
Doesn't
off,
tell us, does it?
now
It
we've
just
been
keeps.
just keeps doing it. But how?
And isn't it interesting that as the number 12 has been prominent, so the number 5 becomes prominent. We have 5 loaves. There are 5,000. Sit in groups of 50. Now it's all 5s.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, you just wonder if there's something that maybe we miss. I don't know.
And how many basketfuls did they gather up?
Yeah, the 12 that John was speaking of
Yep,
there, the
they-
12 baskets full. So, yeah. So here's this story of an incredible miracle.
And some of the language of it is kind of a foretaste of something we're going to see later, isn't
Yeah.
it? When it talks about he gave thanks and broke the bread.
Oh yes.
He
What
didn't
does that
close his
remind
eyes.
you of?
Did you notice that? He looked towards heaven. And I read somewhere that early on they didn't close their eyes when they prayed. Did you know that, or did you read that someplace? That's something that was entered into later on.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, but John is just saying something here that's very significant. Go ahead, continue,
Well,
John.
Jesus later is with the disciples.
Yeah.
He's going to take bread and give thanks and break it and
Yes.
distribute it
Yeah.
at the Lord's Supper. And so, in a sense, I think we're already getting a foretaste here of the Lord's Supper. Now, I think John, when he tells this
it
story,
is the Lord's Supper.
yeah, makes that very explicit.
John 5. Yeah.
But it's implicit here already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, in a sense, already something of the meaning of the Lord's Supper, it seems to me, of what it is for Jesus to be the bread of life, to give himself for us.
Yes.
And we begin to see that, well, the giving thanks is so much, the Lord's Supper is called the Eucharist, which is the word for giving thanks. So I think that as the gospel writers tell this, even the ones that aren't as explicit as John, that they have to have in their mind already,
Well-
wanting us to now think about the Lord's Supper.
Well,
when
they
you see
know
this.
they know the end of the story.
Absolutely.
Like a mystery thriller, if you
Yeah.
read the ending ahead of time, you'd know what it meant before time. And so I think that we're given a hint of what's coming. But let me point to something in the story that points backward, I think. If you look, it says in verse 12,
Of.
of chapter 9 here.
Okay.
The disciples say at the end of verse 12, we are here in a deserted place. Now, when you have a desert place and you have a feeding, I have a feeling that it recalls the manna, which is the bread from
Oh,
heaven.
yes,
John
yes.
5, the feeding of 5,000, Jesus starts talking about the manna
That's
from
right.
heaven. And before long, in this chapter, Jesus will be on a mountain. And in the story of Moses, then they go to Mount Sinai and the giving of the law. And so there are things that are parallel
Look
here.
at that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a
Yes.
richness here, which if we know our Old Testaments, we're going to sort of pick up something of this.
The Old Testament explains the New Testament, and the New Testament explains the Old Testament.
Yeah, and even the word Exodus will occur here in this chapter.
Really?
Yeah, we'll come to it. We'll just hold on for that one.
And of course, again, in John 6, you have explicit reference to the manna again as well. So John, both the forward and the
Yes.
backward, he makes more explicit. And
That's
as he
right.
often does, kind of plays on the symbolism in a more specific way than
That's right.
the other gospel writers.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But I think it's still there, both ways here, pointing back to the manna and ahead to the Lord's Supper.
Well, wouldn't you think now, since we've got the story of Herod just before this,
Yeah,
and he's wondering who Jesus is,
right.
that this story is giving us a hint, a big hint of who he is. And now we go right back to the same kind of questions that Herod raised. You know, who is this?
Yeah.
And Jesus this time is going to raise the question himself. Shall we go to that?
Once
ahead.
when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "The Christ of God."
Yeah. Now it seems to me that you could hear. Now he says, Jesus, who do the crowds say? Now he's just been feeding the crowds.
Yeah.
And the crowds, I can imagine, though it's not written here, that the crowds are saying, now who
Don't you think he already knew the answer to the question?
the crowds say?
Yeah.
Yeah, but he wants to raise it for his disciples.
That's right. But he already knows, doesn't he?
Yeah, but I think the crowds are engaging, the ones that got this food, you know, they're engaging in thoughts about, now who is this man?
Who is this man?
Who is he? Everything is about who is he here.
Yeah.
You know, and Luke is leading us step by step into a recognition of who Jesus is.
And they saw him multiply that bread and those fishes.
Yeah.
And so he says to the disciples, "Who do they say I am?" Now Jesus, I think, already knew what they were saying about him, but he wanted the disciples to verbalize it.
Exactly. But even when they verbalize it, they will not understand it like they should.
No.
They'll
No.
verbalize it, they'll tell the truth, but the truth will not have all the substance that belongs to it.
Yeah.
That's really the way this chapter actually goes, you know.
So when Peter says, "You're the Christ of God," which would be the Messiah.
You're the Messiah.
You're the Messiah of God. But then Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. So
Now,
then we have that
what
same
is that
thing.
about? Why did he say, "Don't tell anyone"?
Well, they may misunderstand, just like you
Because he's
do.
going to the cross right here.
Yeah, but they're going to misunderstand.
Yeah.
And he's got to say some things. Don't tell anyone, but let me just tell you this so that you'll learn something. The Son of Man must undergo great suffering,
Suffer
be
many
rejected, and die.
things.
See? So,
Rejected by the elders and chief priests and teachers of the law. Oh,
listen, to reject the Messiah, and to think that the Messiah dies, these are ideas that are impossible.
yeah, yeah.
You can't have a suffering Messiah,
No,
a crucified
he's going to
Christ.
set up his kingdom right here on earth and throw the Romans out.
Right. This has got to be connected with that. He certainly tells them
I think
not
so.
to tell it all.
Now Luke softens this a
Oh,
good bit, doesn't
Does
Oh,
he?
he softens
from
it.
what we find in Mark and in Matthew.
Yeah.
Because there, the disciples are scandalized by what he says. Now Luke doesn't tell us
No.
that the disciples are scandalized by this. But over in Mark, Peter's going to say, "No way. It can't be." And Jesus is going to say to Peter,
Get
"Get
thee
behind me, Satan."
That's right. They
Don't
don't
tempt
understand
me.
well. Well, even John the Baptist didn't understand well. He's in prison, and, you know, in the gospel it says he sends an embassy to Christ to ask him, you know, are you the
Are
one
you
to
the
come?
one, or we look for another?
What am I doing in prison?
That's right.
And the Messiah opens the prison doors, and so on.
Isn't it generally true that the disciples come off looking a little better in Luke than they do in Mark?
Yeah, just like the physicians might just be
Yes.
a little bit better off. So the disciples are a little bit better off. You know, that's interesting. But you know what hits me is, who do the crowds say that I am? And they answered, well, John the Baptist, Elijah, and one of the
The
ancient prophets. So none of them say he's God. Nobody says that. No one says he's the Messiah. They don't say that. They were hoping he would prove himself to be the Messiah.
Yeah.
They say that he's a prophet, essentially a prophet. That's what Jesus is, some kind of a prophet. That's as high as they got up. And then Peter,
But Peter goes a step further.
he goes a step further and he says, you're the Messiah of God. And then Jesus predicts his sufferings and so on. That's interesting.
Yes, it is.
You're the Messiah, and Jesus, in a way, interprets the meaning of Messiah, which Jews didn't think that the Messiah ever did. Any of those things.
And the ones that killed him
Yeah,
were the elite of the day.
yeah.
Don't you find that amazing?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And we
Those who were educated and studied and knew, they're the
well,
ones that killed him.
but you see, actually, we can say there are ignominious, terrible reasons why they didn't, but we can probably say there were reasons of expedience in part. Reasons of expedience, because we know from John and so on that, isn't it Caiaphas who says it's better for one man to die than the whole nation to die? And that means better for you, who has such a large following, to die, because when the Romans note this about you, they're liable to swoop in on us and kill us all. Now that's a political reason for Jesus to die.
Terrible.
A very practical reason, but a terrible one. See?
But Jesus also makes sure that after we see this, we don't start feeling too superior to these people. Because immediately he calls us and challenges us in ways that should humble us greatly, because he immediately ties the kind of Messiah.
You mean verse 23?
Yes,
Yeah.
the kind of Messiah that he's going to be to the kind of disciples that we have to be.
And these are going on the way to a cross, eh, John? Just like he went to a cross, we're going on the way to a cross. Isn't that is a perfect time?
Go ahead and read that,
Yes.
John.
Okay. He's just said what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
He, as the Messiah, is going to be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And then he says to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for a person to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self?
And then, isn't it interesting? Verse 26, those who are ashamed of me and my words, of them the Son of Man will be ashamed. In the immediate context, this would be who are ashamed of the idea of a crucified Messiah, and ashamed in a way, or denying it, of being disciples who are willing to bear a cross, which is an emblem of shame. You know,
absolutely. And when we say cross, we have that 2,000 years of history
it's
behind
wonderful.
it. And, it has a totally different sound than it would to them. It
But
would
he
be,
tells us,
for
take up our cross daily.
Mhm.
Now, what does that
It would be
mean?
like saying, take up your electric chair,
Yeah.
or
Be willing to die.
the gas chamber,
Be willing to
In
die.
the worst,
or
in
the
worst
lethal
way.
injection.
Right. Yeah,
It
we sing a song. On a hill far away
stood an
old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. Now that's what we're supposed to take up.
Yeah.
And be willing to endure whatever misunderstandings or even anger that arouses, not because we want to be martyrs, but we're willing to bear that cross as a witness to Christ. That's what he bore. These words are so powerful.
That's right. And it makes it very hard for us to be too hard on those people, because when we see the demand, it has to be terribly humbling for us.
It is. And there's a promise here, though. And I love, don't you love this promise?
Where?
Verse 24, for those who want to save their life will lose it. Well, that's not a promise that we want to go there. But remember this, that if you do bear the cross for me, the second half of the verse, while you may think you're losing your life, you're actually saving it. Ultimately, after the cross comes the crown, so to speak, as we say homiletically, And that's it. How to keep that vision alive, that we're heading toward not just the cross, but toward resurrection as well. That's what's inherent in this. It first sounds real hard, but then go on with it, go on. You're going to find the portals of the tomb opened, and we're going to enter in. That's pretty tremendous. But it'd be a terrible thing to be ashamed of Christ, 26, and when he comes again say, as you've done to me, I must register to you. You're ashamed of me. In a sense, I don't like to even say these words, but I'm ashamed of you. That is to say, you rejected me, and where is the place of acceptance? You didn't want me. We don't want to hear that word.
No. And we think, we would never do that. But look what Peter did. Are we any better than Peter?
No.
I don't think so.
Well, we once, some time back, studied the book of Revelation, and the whole thing is to not give up your witness in the face of any persecution or death itself. You go ahead, because Jesus holds the keys of death,
Yeah.
And he can unlock that door and will. It is living by faith, isn't it? The faith that saves it. What else is it? You plunge into the abyss, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, who's going to read on?
Well, we got verse 27. We didn't say that one.
Go ahead.
But truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death. In other words, who will not have just borne the cross ultimately, before they see the kingdom of God.
All right, I read that too. How do you explain that to people in this day and age?
Yeah. Well,
do you have an answer?
Well, there's one answer that presents itself immediately. Maybe there's much more to it than this, but the very next scene that we have here, the very next scene is the transfiguration of Jesus on a mountaintop.
8 days later.
8 days later. Maybe we should read that story. I think it supplies part of the answer.
Okay.
Would you go with me there, John?
I would too, yes, absolutely. I think the way Luke has crafted it,
yes,
he wants us to think
I
about
think that. I think exactly. These orders are not just willy-nilly. He didn't just shake up the stories and then in a basket and then come out and pull them out. He's got something in mind.
That's right.
Would you read that for us, Ivan?
Well, all right. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, remember, after these sayings, and that it culminates,
So
they'll see the kingdom of God.
They're tied together.
Jesus
clearly.
took with him Peter and John and James. Those are the very three of whom we have those epistles at the end of the New Testament, toward the end, James and Peter and John. And he went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they, the disciples, saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. There's a lot of richness in all of this. They appeared in glory. All right, they appeared in glory. I hope you will remember verse 26. The Son of Man is going to come in his glory. And now they appeared with him in glory on a mountaintop, and were speaking of his departure or exodus. That's the word exodus in the Greek language, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions, this is amazing, were weighed down with sleep.
My Bible says very sleepy.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I don't see how they could be sleepy right now. Maybe that's a parable
that
of
was
all of
before
us.
this.
Okay. But since they had stayed awake, yeah, that's right. You're right, Carol. They saw his glory, there's that word again, and the two men who stood with him. And just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said.
Yeah.
And while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice and said, notice this. What does this sound like? This is my son, my chosen son. You know, like the baptism.
Yes.
Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent in those days, and they told no one any of the things that they had seen. There's that motif of silence again. But the voice that spoke saying who Jesus is, and all of this happens on a mountaintop amidst glory.
Yes.
You know? So now we come to how is this tied in with the kingdom of God, that some will not see death before they see. Okay? That's where we are perched right
So
now.
they're certainly getting a vision of the kingdom in this experience.
They're getting an anticipation of the whole thing. And I'm afraid we're likely to say pretty soon, well, come back for the next thrilling episode.
Well, we're going to have a little teaser there.
Yeah, that
Right?
we've got it right now.
We've got it right now, and I hope our viewers will join us again as we continue on in the book of Luke, searching for answers. And we hope you will stay by, and we hope we're explaining things so that you understand what's going on.
Yes.